Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to the second part of PGM International Symposiums of today. So we've been starting already since Monday the 23rd on a theme of traditions in transition. And it was really, really nice. I'm already ready to transit somewhere else. So we have discussions already with the ensemble keynotes of people coming from different traditions. And there was one, the keynote video as a prologue to the opening, talking about the teachers, how empathies, how love and kindness of the teacher can pass on from generation to generation. But we still missing a lot of things about tradition and transitions. And today we will have the honor of welcoming our honored guests for the first time, Professor Dr. Mieko Kanno from Sibelius Academy, Docmus doctoral program from Finland, and she will also be coming with her students and friends and colleagues as well. And today I also have the honor of asking Johannes Kim, a very good colleague of mine, who is also a violinist. So this is the first time we have a violinist as a keynote. So thank you very, very much, Professor Mieko Kanno. And now, so the session from now, I would like to hand it over to Johannes Kim. Thank you very, very much.
All right, welcome everyone to today's afternoon keynote speech. I'm delighted and honored to introduce our keynote speaker, violinist Dr. Mieko Kanno, who is professor in artistic doctoral studies, as well as director of the Center for Artistic Research at DocMU's Doctoral School of Sibelius Academy at the University of Arts, Helsinki in Finland. Dr. Kanno started her career as an international competition winner and has since been a keen performer of contemporary music and has pioneered work on notation as technology. Today, she will be speaking on empathy and musical performance. Dr. Kanno, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for a very kind introduction. I've been popping in and out of the symposium since Monday, and I'm really enjoying it. There are lots of tangent points that are running through the symposium, many of which are also relevant to my thinking, and I'll be touching upon quite a few of them in my presentation. So the theme of this 2021 conference is Traditions in Transition. Tradition is often defined as the transmission of customs, beliefs, or practices from generation to generation. While this definition emphasizes the manner of transmission, the fact of passing on of some activity from one generation to another, the word tradition is also loaded with values such as something to be taken seriously, like a wisdom, or something that inspires veneration. The adjective form of the word, traditional, imparts a different range of meaning and nuances. It refers to being a part of a tradition, something long established. The word traditional often emphasizes the length of time in which something has existed, perhaps more than the manner of transmission. It assumes that traditions are long established customs. Next, what about the word transition? It refers to the process of changing from one state to another, or a period in which this process takes place. Most processes of change take place in time, but there are processes in which the change is more abstract, such as changes introduced to a course curriculum. In such a case, not everyone may feel the transition as a lived experience, or it's never meant to. My point is to bring to our attention the way in which the passing of time is made implicit in these definitions. Time is their shared element, but the concepts of tradition and transition relate to the concept of time differently, as if the same thread is woven into two very different textiles using different techniques, affecting very different meaning to the words. Indeed, time does very strange things, particularly in music. Then I wonder what of music is subjected to time when we think about traditions in transition. This question has a direct bearing to my presentation today. So, my talk today has 4 sections. The main theme is empathy, and that's my first section. Empathy is a human activity which enables an understanding and sharing of feelings between people. It has 3 types. The first is cognitive empathy. It is about getting to know someone else's thought and feelings from this someone's own perspective. The second is emotional empathy, which may bring you closer to this someone after gaining cognitive empathy. Emotional empathy can be contagious and often involves physical sensations, like singing together in a football match. The third is compassionate empathy. This often leads to an action of wanting to help. There are related concepts too. Sympathy and compassion are often included as types of empathy. These concepts can be understood as special forms of empathy in the way in which I have defined empathy so far. Sympathy is an emotionally concordant type of empathy, often in relation to sorrow or pity. Compassion can be understood as an intensified case of sympathy that leads you to take actions. In my approach, however, I make clear distinctions between empathy and these related concepts. Empathy emphasizes understanding of someone else's thought or feelings, while not necessarily sharing or agreeing with them. This is the point that differentiates empathy from sympathy. Empathy is different from compassion on a similar ground, but the two concepts are further distinguishable in the social environment in which they take place. Compassion often assumes an existing barrier or a social class difference between the people which the act of compassion tries to cross. In contrast, empathy assumes equality between the people, no barrier, and often requires an effort from both parties towards a holistic understanding about an idea, person, or action that is previously unknown to them. The egalitarian ground for empathy, as well as the cognitive and emotional effort required for empathy, are essential characteristics of empathy as I approach the subject. Empathy characterizes the power of music. Music can move you to tears, and it can affect your mood. There are many ways in which empathy happens in music. We know much about how empathy works in canonical art music and in commercial popular music. But we know less about how to generate empathy in music. The knowledge is even more scarce when it comes to communicating music that is new, lesser known, or outside of the norm. Musical values, sensibilities, and perspectives that are outside of the standard also suffer the same lack of knowledge, such as music making done by non-male musicians. The empathic power of music lies in its intangibility, yet, ironically, its ambiguities and prejudices also lie in the same intangibility. The topic of empathy has been widely explored in philosophy, aesthetics, and psychology. Music education, music psychology, and neuroscience have revealed both the function and effect of empathy in music. There are other disciplines which may not explicitly reference empathy, but take it as the foundation of communal knowledge. For example, music semiotics articulates meaning that is shareable within a certain cultural group. Likewise, cultural anthropology strives to articulate cultural characteristics of a specific group of people. The idea of a community often underlies that of empathy. Now, music can touch you, but you cannot touch music. By saying music can touch you, we are referring to empathic touch. In contrast, in the second phrase, but you cannot touch music, we are referring to haptic touch. Music is not a thing that we can see or touch. It is intangible. But we can touch musical instruments to make music, including our body when we sing, and in so doing, we develop a profound sense of haptic touch, as if to compensate the intangibility. If we listen to music live, the sound waves also touch us physically, making it an haptic experience. Even though empathy is the prominent way in which music communicates, haptic touch is an integral part of musical experience. Having said that, music is communicated primarily in sound and engages the oral sense. My desire to focus on empathy is also a reflection and response to the vision-dominant sense orientation of the contemporary society. Sonic skills are used less and less. It is fascinating to observe how they were used in the past, even as late as in the 20th century. For example, car mechanics used to judge motor functions by listening to the engine. This became replaced by visual meters in the mid-20th century to enable analysis of the mechanical functions by the drivers themselves. There remains today some uses of sound and sonic skills, such as fire alarms and stethoscope, the classic picture of a doctor's authority in medicine. It is not my intention to lament about the disappearance of sonic skills in society. Instead, I would like to ask what contribution sonic skills can still make in contemporary society. I think that sound still has a potential to tell us about the world in ways other senses cannot. And it is our responsibility to ensure such means of knowledge acquisition and dissemination. Now on to interface. Let us look at the idea of an interface between musicians and audience in contemporary art music as one way of exploring empathy in music communication. So, what is an interface? Interface is a point or surface where two groups, subjects or systems, meet and interact. It is most frequently used when talking about computers, where it means a program or device that enables a user to communicate with a computer and beyond. It is a point at which connection is made. So, why focus on the idea of an interface? It is because music is a communicative art form rather than a stand-alone object. In the 20th century, music was often considered and studied as an art of organized sound or combining of tones. In the 21st century, emphasis has moved from the thing to the in-between. Focusing on the interface between musicians and audience allows careful consideration on the nature of the communication medium between the music-making experience on the one hand and music listening experience on the other. It leads us to question and redefine both experiences and the relation between them. Interface as a focus of study expands the subject matter from music alone to the broader subject areas that I have mentioned, such as philosophy, psychology, sociology, and others. Much of the music education in a conservatoire setting, where Western art music is studied, remains such that music is situated in hermetic isolation. It often says that there are certain authentic or right ways in doing things. Such ways of doing things are, more often than not, called traditions. I'm not going to critique pros and cons of this type of education today. I would simply like to point out that this ethos creates an atmosphere which encourages the singular intention and aspiration to become an ideal musician. In this atmosphere, no interface is necessary. But the reality of music making is never singular. There is always a different context. We have different people to play with, different people to play to, and different occasions at which to play. Musicians learn to adjust for each context while simultaneously holding on to this singular ideal performance. But the aspirational singularity is not equal to the copy and paste sameness in the realizations. different performances by the same person of the same piece can be equally good. They are differently good. As we move towards the mid-21st century, we are becoming more comfortable with the notion of multiplicity and embracing it, even in art music. My contention is that the idea of an interface enables this multiplicity further by providing a conceptual open space for it. It encourages us to think more constructively about how to respond to each music-making situation as appropriately and creatively as we can. It is not about how to tolerate a less than perfect situation. The results of this new way of thinking may affect not only the way we communicate music, but also the music itself. I believe that we are taking a quiet but radical step in rethinking music as cultural discourse. In the next hour, my collaborators will give concrete examples of interface. My collaborators are doctoral students at the Sibelius Academy, and you see 3 of them today. And let me briefly introduce them. Lucy. Lucy searches for different locations for disseminating her performance according to the repertoire she wants to present. She also finds locations first, then think about what to perform there. Her research focuses on discovering similarities and differences in the contemporary music cultures between USA and Finland. Her identity as a clarinetist locates her research firmly in the performer perspective, not only on how to play, but also on how to present music. She searches for appropriate ways to present music for clarinet and electronics, or music performance in a botanic garden. She searches for a satisfying and pleasing experience for the performer, producer, and listener. She puts music making in a broader context. Her solutions are imbued with anthropological and sociological considerations and bring new insight to the practice. Maria is an ensemble violinist, and she asks, what is involved in leading an ensemble of musicians? She looks closely at leading gestures, examining what gestures are for. She realizes that she uses gestures not only for fellow musicians, but also for herself and the audience. She explores ways in which she can engage gestures to improve communication as music. She examines leading in the solo repertoire as a proof of concept. Bodily movement is her interface. Ville is a composer, and his research focus is on creating an affective bond between the ecological environment and the listener. His ecological cases relate to coal, oil, or wood. He introduces a new understanding about the relationship between humans and the environment through his composition. The affective bond between the ecological environment and the listener is the ultimate aim of his interface, on which he works by composing music. He calibrates the interface carefully through compositional design. Although his interface is necessarily more abstract than the interface between the performer and the listener, the concern for calibration and considerations he brings to it are the same as in the other musicians. The three examples will showcase three distinct interfaces that each musician has designed in order to achieve the optimum form of communication in their own specialist areas. They will highlight independently practical realities of each interface, its strengths, as well as challenges for future development. Through grappling with real concerns, each musician determines specific ways and degrees of implementation in order to achieve the optimum. This type of artistic interface can be described as artistic curation. And this is something we will see this evening. Curation or event design is an increasingly popular practice and profession in the arts, and directing an exhibition or event with original perspectives is becoming an art form in itself. But there is a fundamental difference between the idea of an interface that I am discussing now and artistic curation. Curation usually acts on artworks that already exist, be it visual artworks, theater, or music, and it is usually executed by someone outside. It is a design process applied to finished artwork. Artistic interface, on the other hand, is a development that influences the ongoing process of art making, such as in the practices of musicians preparing for a performance. It can be said that artistic interface is a curation brought into the musician's expertise. The scalability within each interface, how much of this or that, may not necessarily be a major concern for each musician, as long as the interface is flexible enough to lead to a solution suitable for each occasion. But it becomes a significant topic when we observe a group of interfaces collectively, as there emerges some behavioral patterns that invite contemplation and analysis. I contend that the scalability provides key information for the building blocks of music communication. It reveals phenomena that relate to aesthetic assumptions about musical excellence and music skill. It encourages sociological analysis and is instructive towards pedagogy. So, next. Performance is scalable. I propose a system called scalable performance as a way of thinking in detail about the operational aspect of the interface. We want to think in a clear, concentrated manner about the scalability within each interface because we are interested in making it work. We want to calibrate the interface with concrete parameters so that musicians can plan their performance imaginatively but in a reliable manner for a variety of occasions. With scalability, the interface allows us to prepare a performance, even with spontaneity, according to each context. It has the capacity to produce multiple kinds of performance without changing characteristic features of an intended performance. I like to think of such interface as a toolbox for musicians, a practical set of guidelines, or indeed a computer program on a laptop to assist in the concert procedure for performers. The idea is not new. Subtle performance adjustments commonly take place during the dress rehearsal. The existing scales, in this sense, include the musician's tempo adjustment in response to the room acoustics of the venue, the pianist trying out the piano to adjust bodily technical details to suit the piano type in use, be it a Yamaha Baby Grand or a Steinway D in a large concert hall, or on-stage musicians' digital parametric calibrations for the monitors in the room when using electronics. But these adjustments have happened until now within the confines of established assumptions of a concert hall culture. And established assumptions are changing and becoming more varied. One such example is the recent surge in online presentations of musical performance. We have been making new adjustments as we go along, following intuition. We also practice an almost subconscious long-term scaling in music performance. For example, musicians prepare performance differently for auditions and competitions. Some colleagues, teachers, advise that there are ways to succeed in these and can supply step-by-step instructions. These instructions are usually not cosmetic adjustments because they tend to affect the approach towards the target task, much in the way of sport psychology. The strategic nature of these instructions suggests that there is a methodology to scaling performance. Scaling goes well beyond adjustment. It is about education. Everything is scalable. Scaling in this way can take place in any music-making process, including and particularly composition. One of my first encounters with structural scalability was a collaboration with the composer Michael Edwards, working with his music composition software. I understand Michael is a familiar face in Bangkok. Well, his software allows the performer to determine the length, pitch characteristics, and formal shape of the piece via computer user interface. There, you can set parameters according to your own preferences and generate a piece of music for each concert occasion. This program encourages the performer to generate an occasion-specific piece of music, the result of which demonstrates variety within the predetermined confines of the computer program. While Edwards is a composer, his main interest can be described as such that he composes a program that composes music. More recent experience of mine in this regard was with the composer Sam Hayden, over a collaboration to create a computer program using live notation for the performer. We produced a computer interface on which the performer could determine the duration, register, rhythmic, and pitch characteristics on the fly in a live situation. Like Edwards, each generation of the program resulted in a different piece, yet loosely identifiable as belonging to the same gestalt of the composition, or the gestalt of the same composition, which the composer had designed in advance. Johannes Kretz is an Austrian composer and improviser of electronic music, and he has a project on scalable compositions as a way towards varying outputs of a composition, where the calibration depends on the type of listeners. Back in the 17th or 18th century, it was normal to produce different versions of the same piece. Why not now, as the audience become more diverse? My interest in scalable performance follows on from these experiences and examples. I realized that performers may not have thought about scalabilities in performance much beyond cosmetic adjustment. But we can be more imaginative and think in abstract terms to gain clarity over the topic. I ask, in which dimensions do musicians adjust performance? Are there dimensions that we are discovering as communication technology evolves? What are the endpoints of the scale in each dimension? What are the relations between different dimensions? How does this way of thinking about performance affect the actual listener experience? We have discussed multiplicity of equally good performances and solutions as a necessary aim in the performance interface. Now, we want to look closely at the concept of diversity in music as a topic related to multiplicity with social implications. We are looking at how cultural variability is integrated as part of the idea of music. Diversity is often considered, in institutional settings at least, somewhat as an auxiliary to make things more responsive to increasingly cosmopolitan world. But I question if diversity is something more fundamental to the process of making things. Why is diversity put in opposition to singularity or authenticity, or even to tradition? Surely, isn't it possible to present both tradition and diversity together as a unified whole in music? In sociology, there is a school of thought in which practical doing of things determines conceptual understanding of them, rather than conceptual understanding of things determining how to do them in practice. Practical doing of things is always diverse because different people do them for different reasons and in different occasions. The fluidity, elasticity, and flexibility is the essence of any practice that survives and flourishes over time. These capacities for mutation apply to the social aspect too. But there is another issue that complicates the fundamental need for diversity in music. Creativity is a significant value in Western thought and is linked to innovation. Creativity is positive. It is even a criterion for assessing anything new in research and in the arts, particularly in contemporary arts. But creativity and tradition are not perceived to mix well, because tradition is seen to represent the past and creativity the future. I have just said that tradition needs fluidity, elasticity, and flexibility. Can these capacities for mutation be considered creative or not? If not, why? At the root of considering diversity in music that has a tradition, such as the performance of Western art music, creativity is exercised but somehow hidden from the surface. The case is more illuminating when we consider traditions outside the West. Many Asian traditional arts emphasize the acquisition of traditional style above personal creativity. The apprentice period may last over 60 years before any artistic individuality is encouraged. Are they, therefore, not creative? Should they be considered only as craftsmen rather than artists? Is the emphasis on creativity and innovation a universally good thing in the arts? I'm not sure. I'm interested in skills and craftsmanship and their function in the practice of music. My point in introducing scalability, that is, not only the idea of an interface, is precisely this: to give ourselves an opportunity to grapple with practical details that constitute musicians' work. Thinking about scalability allows us to tease out complex details, relations, and values that musicians juggle when they produce an operational interface for performance. I'm interested in not only the notion and existence of a performance interface, but also in the practical aspect of how different elements are mapped out and put into dynamic relation in the process. Details matter. I'm mindful of the fact that in my experience, I have seen many interesting ideas that are poorly executed in music. There are many interesting interfaces that do not fulfill their potential because the musicians haven't spent the necessary time or care for calibration. An interface is operated with musicians' skills. That is why I like to think of the performance interface as a toolbox. What goes inside the toolbox may be informed by more abstract knowledge and understanding of relevant concepts. But the use of the real tools inside the toolbox is dependent on the expert skill of the practitioner. how each practitioner uses the tools varies from one person to another and from one occasion to another. But musical skill or craft is often considered secondary or as a given in musical discourse. It is often said that, particularly today, that craft is not enough in order to survive and build a career as a musician. I think that we can be more alert in developing the craft in order to respond to the contemporary needs and become more explicit about which skill is used for which purpose and in which scalability. We are collecting case studies with their interfaces, gaining data from them, and analyzing how skills are used, not applied, but used in making the interface functional. We are interested in how is it mapped and used. Towards a new theory of practice in music. Music is a performing art and predominantly intangible art. Art music engages with the past in ways that are not comparable to other arts because of their intangibility. We have learned to think of time in a linear way with a teleological order where the past informs the present and future. Philosophy, aesthetics, and music theory have allowed contemplation on music in an ordered manner, calmly and reflectively. Yet, music mixes the past and present in an inimitable fashion. A performance can sound surprising, but at the same time inevitable with a sense of destiny. This is one of the many instances that reveal to us how mysteriously time behaves in music and how our musical experience can positively mix the past, present, and future. By contemplating on empathy and by focusing on the interface as a means for experiencing empathy, we are moving towards a new theory of practice in music that centers our attention on the act of making and sharing music in the community. This theory is not about how to play a piece of music, nor how to appreciate a particular genre of music. It aims to show how music communities can imagine futures collectively in listening to Beethoven, new music, or to any music. While there are some excellent examples, such as NIPE in Iceland, which was presented on Monday afternoon, the emphasis on community is still rare in art music. Finally, the pandemic has given realism to the statement that the future used to be better. We are more conscious of communities, real and online, and of touch. We are learning collectively about empathy in society and how music can contribute to it. I hope that my presentation serves as an encouragement for all of you to think about empathy when practicing music. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanno, for this wonderful presentation and for raising so many wonderful points about what we do as performers and the different considerations that we have to go through. And I love this idea of the interface as being a place where the performer and the audience or the listeners can meet, and this sense of community that you're speaking about, which I think is so important. And so I was wondering, because I think your ideas are so intriguing, could we ask you a little bit about your own process when you are performing? How do you calibrate your performances and create this interface in your own performing life?
I'll try to answer as best as I can. I suppose that was the initial, my motivation to get involved in contemporary music in the first instance, despite the fact, I come from a very traditional violinistic training background, was that I wanted to play something I wanted to do something that had relevance to everyday life, like what was happening. For example, in literature, you see a lot of things which talk about what's happening today. And it doesn't have to be anything serious, or political, but it's just, little things about the latest washing machine, or, that everything is now a digital television, and can be anything, or it's about anime or whatsoever. And in the same way, I wanted to somehow have that relevance in what I do. And that's how I started it. But now, particularly in the last year, it has made me think harder about what contribution I want to make today, because there are questions about concert hall culture that only 10% of the people go to theaters and concert halls, whereas 90% of the arts funding go into those institutions, and so forth. And most people nowadays access music online. I mean, most people come across music in a digitally mediated ways. Very few of us actually hear real musical sounds. We all work, or we are all connected to music institutions, so for us to listen to a string quartet is not that unusual, a live string quartet. But a lot of people in the real world, including people like my parents who are retired people, they come across string quartet music mostly via radio, computer, whatsoever, not live. And when we think about younger generations, it's even more so. So in my own career, I've seen how things have changed. And, that's all very exciting. But one of the things, yes, I do think about is that how do I want to present music? If it is just to play in the concert hall, certainly it doesn't have to be me. There are plenty of violinists, plenty of younger generation violinists who can come up with new ideas. If I do it, what is it? Why am I doing it? And that's more likely to be outside concert halls in the future. And that's what I'm thinking about, because I am aware of this sort of imbalance as we speak.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much. I think that is a very important question for all performers to ask themselves, is why are we doing what we're doing, and making sure that our purpose is clear and also meaningful. But I was very intrigued what you were saying about starting off in the world of classical music and the traditional concert hall and in that life. And certainly that was part of my training as well. And I'm sure many of us here. But in my own experience, I also kind of discovered contemporary music as a way to communicate more directly, in a sense. That's what I found when I was being exposed to contemporary music for the first time and working with composers. What I enjoyed was this very direct connection and being able to collaborate. And I thought that this was very much more exciting than some of the training that I had received, in which the learning was rather one directional. But I think in contemporary music, the vibrancy happens in the collaboration. So that was very exciting for me. So I'm very inspired to hear also of your journey of coming to contemporary music. And I would like to ask your opinion. Do you think, because although I as a performer and as a musician, I feel that contemporary music has a potential to speak directly to its listeners. I know that not all listeners feel the same way, and many listeners maybe feel alienated by contemporary music, or they don't know how to connect to it. And so when you're performing this music, how do you deal with these kinds of responses or miscommunication?
I wish I had an answer. Rather than answering that question, and if I may, I'd like to comment on the concerts I listened to on Monday night and yesterday. For example, the Monday evening, it was a fantastic range of mixtures, crossing of all kinds of imaginable borders. And, you know, I was thinking that it's in some way a lot of it, well, all of them had some creative new things. You know, there were a lot of existing pieces, you know, from the traditional repertoire too, but have been kind of given a very unusual twist to it, because at one point I think I heard some Tchaikovsky violin concerto violin part mixed with something else which said something about Irish something. And, you know, it took me a while to realize that I actually know this tune, that kind of thing. You know, perhaps using a more fashionable term, I would say that that was very rhizomatic, or, you know, sort of, what do you say, re-territorialized or something. But it was just really fantastic to observe. It was like something, you know, watching something grow right in front of me, which I didn't know what it was. But, you know, then I realized that people are, it's not so much about how to present contemporary music. It's about how to well, integrate in an organic manner or symbiotic manner new ideas or inspirations, or, you know, little things we think about now. And sometimes we are not necessarily thinking that we are doing new music as such. And then the borders can be, you know, the borders, people in this kind of conference context, people often think first and foremostly about East and West. But there are many other borders like art music and popular music. Or what I observed certainly on Monday was that childhood and adulthood, those two very different worlds, were mixed or kind of, yeah, put together. And those little things are really fascinating, and those things really kind of push forward the idea of new music, or what music is. I mean, there was it a discussion session yesterday, earlier in the afternoon? There was this, when you were talking about the Asian Youth Ensemble, how we how we keep up the community next year. Shall we meet in person or shall we meet online or both? In a way, two different or two overlapping communities. And then someone mentioned about, so far AYE's been more concerned with notated music. And I think this somehow notation still acts as a barrier for a lot of people. Now I notice that now most of us play music from an iPad, and the iPad is getting smaller and smaller, but brighter and brighter. Although I need even more glasses for them. So in that sense, kind of, and this interface of notation, which used to be some paper, is again changing. As I said, there are some live notation programs where time doesn't pass from left to right, but from back to front, like you are driving. The time passes this way, and the notation can be like that, and that sort of starts to change the idea of, in this case, I'm talking about this notation interface as some kind of thing, a thing in between us players and the audience, because part of the barrier we experience in new music is this sheet music, certainly in solo or small ensemble ensemble music. But I mean, this is just a response on top of my head. Probably there are other opinions. Someone like Maria Bouzari, who will be talking in the next hour, may have different opinions and worth asking her later.
Yeah, we certainly will. Before we move on, I just wanted to ask one last question, because you mentioned a lot about diversity and multiplicity, and also what you were saying just now, that we should kind of remove these barriers and just be open-minded to receive different experiences. We don't need to actually necessarily label them or categorize them, and we don't need to feel restricted by the way things have been done before. But keeping that in mind, I wonder, or I question, if there are just maybe in our world today and what we're facing, there are too many options available. And have you ever experienced a kind of option paralysis where it's hard to know, because just so many things are possible, how do you decide what to do next? Or do you have some guidelines for young musicians on how they can form their path when so many things are possible, which is so exciting, but also can be daunting in a way?
Yes, that's a very good question. And from my point of view, I think it's a really good thing that there are many options. At the same time, I'm aware that there are more competitions at the same time. So choosing something is very different. And, like in school, at the age of 14, you have to decide what you want to do the rest of your life. It's tough, because you don't know what it's going to be like in 20 years' time. Never mind, 2 weeks' time. I'm fascinated by the capabilities of young people to be able to do so many things. I really admire that, which means more options, but also this having to choose one becomes so difficult. I do sympathize with that dilemma. I suppose, I mean, in my case, it wasn't that difficult because there weren't so many things that I was good at, I suppose. But I don't know. I actually don't know how. I don't have an answer to your question. I'm sorry, but let me think about it and get back to you.
Of course. I think actually everyone inherently has limitations. I guess that's what we face already. So the challenge more is to be more open-minded. I think that's what everyone can work towards, because we already have limitations that we face if we think about that. But yeah, thank you so much for all of your ideas. And I just really loved everything that you were talking about. And just I'm having so many ideas, new ideas after hearing your talk. And if we can we now commence with our paper session with your doctoral students? Would you mind introducing them for us, please?
Yes. Can you put on your camera, please?
Hello.
Yes. So, and then Lucy. Yes, everyone. Hello. Well, as I introduced them in my presentation, all I do at this point is to identify which one is which. In my introduction, I think Lucy came first. Lucy is a clarinetist. Then came Maria, Maria Bouzari, who's also experienced contemporary music violinist. So Maria, you should have answered all these questions I struggled to answer just now. But she'll be talking about her own case study. And Ville is a composer. And yes, his project is about the environment. It's quite it's a slightly different approach towards the idea of an interface. They are all doing the doctoral, what we call art study program, which has a high amount of artistic components. So Lucy and Maria give 5 concerts or concert events as part of their doctoral degree. With on top of that, they do a piece of writing. And Ville is a composer, so he presents about 3 concerts worth of music, I think, and then 1 live concert to which the examiners come to listen to, and then he also submits a piece of writing. They are so therefore doctoral students. At the same time, as I said in my presentation, they are very much collaborators and colleagues as far as I'm concerned. My presentation today, the idea of an interface and thinking about scalability, would not have happened without them. Our doctoral school is quite large. We have altogether more than 100 students, doctoral candidates. And then the art study program has about 70 people. And so these 3 are, in a way, representatives today. So have we decided who does it first? Who wants to go first?
I would love to go first, if it's still a good schedule.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, go for it. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity to talk today at the Traditions in transition, and thanks to Mieko for a wonderful keynote and Henkim for wonderful questions. So I will be presenting my doctoral project and then addressing the issues Mieko brought out in her keynote. And let me share the slides with you. So here we go. The presentation is about agency in ecological composition, and the topic or the headline of my research is material ecology in musical composition: coal, oil, and wood in an ecologically engaged composition process. So why these three materials? Coal, oil, and wood are key agents in the human-induced changes in the environmental carbon cycle. But we all know these changes are warming the climate at an accelerating speed, increasing biodiversity loss and global pollution. So they're involved really at the heart of this truly devastating global event. In my project, with the perspective and limitation of concert composition and human ecology, I'm focusing on these three entities in their various life cycles: their natural state, extraction, energy use, product use, and dispersion. So mainly from the perspective of human use, not their true full life cycle. My doctoral project consists of 11 compositions, as well as a written thesis that presents the processes of these works, focusing in detail on three works. The thesis is in its nature analytical, not theoretical, since I'm dealing with the compositions when they are unfinished, addressing them during the process of composing. My composing process usually has the following path. I use field recordings either made by myself or acquired from different sites or objects or materials, and use these sounds for acoustic or electroacoustic composing. Sometimes I use particular objects or materials on stage as sound sources as well. All the works in this doctoral project are presented in a concert hall context, but some of them have installation-like qualities, and in this case I call them installation composition. Sometimes they have performance art-like qualities, in which case I call them performance compositions. So all in all, there are three different categories of compositions in this project. So agency. What could this mean here? To start with, I would divide agents and agency in general to different domains. When I started this project, I had a concrete goal in mind: how to present the various places, materials, and ecological issues I was addressing in a more concrete way on the stage. I wanted to create a kind of closeness, to bring the audience closer to all of these cases with close microphone field recordings, materials, visual elements, and texts regarding these cases. Closeness also meant for me bringing composing closer to myself, to my everyday being as a person and as a citizen. So in a sense, this is an emancipatory project for me. I brought the thing that concerns me the most to the core of my artistic work, the destruction of the environment in its various perspectives. Continuing on Mieko's thoughts, here is a kind of interface change for me. This means that I no longer work merely as a composer, but as a parent of young children, an active citizen, and a member of various communities. In my view, the interface change might be mutual. My concerns are part of the interaction with the audience, and their concerns become part of the work while they are experiencing it, because of the context created in the program notes and the work itself. So the project is somehow emancipatory, I hope, also for the public, although the activation of the public cannot be verified within the framework of this particular study. But I'll come back later to what I hope or wish to happen after the concert. What I regard as at the moment to be the biggest interface change is the role of listening. Instead of creating or building a work out of my musical persona to be listened by the audience, all possible phases and positions of the process are now about listening. I start with field recordings, analyze and listen to them carefully. The composing is actually listening to the analysis, but also the performer's role is more about listening than presenting in most of these works. The true composer is somehow, in fact, the sound of these materials. Now, the audience is not simply listening to me or my music either, but they're bringing their own conceptions about these issues to the experience. They're also presenting in a way, as well as listening. In future projects, I am engaging the audience also to be a part of the field recording process, and also to perform in the concert hall. This will be a part of a project with the Vaasa City Orchestra in 2023. So in a very general way, considering my own work and this whole project, there is not a dramatic change in the individual elements of my music, but there is a change in the modes of listening and positioning of elements. The scholar and sound artist Brandon Lavelle has proposed a kind of listening activism in his book Sonic Agency through various examples. And this is a particularly important guideline for me as well, and presenting a sort of soft activism in a concert context. Let's go forward with the theoretical framework. Like I mentioned, the ecological issue binding all these compositions and cases together is the carbon cycle and its particular life cycles. In the limitation of human ecology, or let's say human use, this is usually referred to as life cycle assessment. For the different stages, the natural state, extraction, energy use, product use, and dispersion, I've recorded and gathered sounds from coal power stations in Finland, coal mines in Pennsylvania, packaging materials and cosmetics with petrochemical byproducts, British oil rigs, historical steam engines, and forest logging and harvesting in Finland. The piece I'm shortly presenting you today is based on field recordings from 1976 on a British oil rig. It's a British petroleum oil rig. As for the compositional strategies, I think we're kind of addressing the traditions at the moment. So my practice is based on the concept of sound object and field recordings, going back to concrete music practices from the 40s and 50s. And then the practices of spectral music, of sound analysis and transcription, and I'm working with the IRCAM software, but this practice goes back to the 70s and 80s. And then regarding composition with my instrumental practice, my practice comes from the writings of Helmut Lahenman and his concept sound type, which is quite close to this concept sound object. As for the listening strategies, these are also historical, but in transition. Let's say the concept of soundscape is in like you know, in constant transition in the field of sound studies. And in a way, the concept of sonic effect by Aguiar and Torkis is an extension of soundscape. Maybe it could be described somewhere as a concept between the meticulous sound object and then the more holistic approach of soundscape. This might be like a middle ground concept. As far this is how I understand it. And then more recently, the writings of Brandon Labelle are important to me, and what sonic agency might mean in the, let's say, what is the aspiration or the meaning of a particular practice or use of concept. So my works, I will go very briefly through the let's say the portfolio of this project. So each of the work presents a specific ecological case. When I'm analyzing the situations, I've been working with the writings of Mi-Won Kwon and his historical divisions of spatial art, and divided in these three sections of physical art, artworks, maybe referring to the, let's say, the land art or the urban space art of the 60s, and then going to more societal site-specific works, addressing what, let's say, like the gallery space means, or what is the, let's say, the studio space of an artist, and how societal issues can be addressed from this space. And then going forward in time into a kind of discursive space where, let's say, a specific topic or a public discussion is the space where the artwork starts or takes the material as its own space. And this is, of course, being explored in early internet art a lot, meaning that we're not addressing a physical space. So here are the works. Considering these different kind of spaces, I would maybe take out the piece "The Harvest." It's the fourth one on top, from the top. It's a piece written for the Klangforum Wien, which will be premiered next year in Konzerthaus Wien, and also Contrechamp will perform another version of this piece in the Mariinsky Theater next year. This piece is about forest machines, one of the latest sort of machines that do these very fast clear cuttings. So this piece is really about this physical space. Another piece, the one on top, the steam engine, is more about the discursive space. It takes its, the topic is the first patented steam engine, which is the new common engine, patented in 1712. And this is regarded, the steam engine is regarded as a sort of starting point of global warming, because it started the mass production and the mass use of coal. And the new common engine is the first mass-produced engine. And I will be using the texts from parliamentary hearings and witness hearings from this time, from coal mine workers and citizens in London. And this will be a disc. I cannot sort of recreate this specific time or place, but I will use the sound of this, like the replicas of these steam engines. And then, since in 1710, Handel was a really prominent composer, not only on concert stages, but on theatrical performances as well. In 1710, I will be using fragments of Handel's work in this in this composition. So it will become a sort of discursive space in the domain of baroque orchestra, in a sense. Let's go forward with the methodology. I talked about the spectral music practice, and I'm using SoundSculpt. Okay, I'll take a step back and address Mieko's thought that I'm mainly working with my ears. So this software doesn't really take me anywhere, but I need to constantly take the parameters to what I hear and what I want to kind of carve out from these recordings I'm listening to. So it's really ear-based work. And then I'm doing these transcriptions of this analysis to notation with open music software. But there's another way of analyzing, which is really just auditory and using the concepts of soundscape and sonic effect. And I'll show a little bit what this means as well. Coming to the decision of concert composition, installation, or performance composition is really it's a discussion between the commissioner, the performers, and really the place where everything is going to be. It's not something I will do on my own, but mainly in discussion with the performer and while doing the piece together. So the piece Oil Rig is for two pianists, objects and field recordings. Just to show you shortly, here is a view of one soundscape, and in the bottom you can see clearly there are some sort of anchoring points, these horizontal lines, and these can be heard throughout this very dense soundscape. So what I do is I zoom in to something particular, do a preliminary filtering, and then start to make with this manual filtering of what I want to hear from a sound. After this, I will take these other rounds of listening and make a partial tracking analysis. Usually I do this with many layers and compare these to one another. So we'll get a sort of sine wave collection of this soundscape, and this can be in turn turned to notation. Here, since this piece is for piano, it is in equal temperament, but this can be done in any sort of temperament with quarter tones or eighth tones, depending on the instrumentation and the context of the performance. This is like it's a very important question of this interface, and it's a question of rehearsal time and the context, really. If there's only one or two rehearsals with an orchestra, I need to do a different sort of approximation of the sound. But if it's a solo piece and there will be 10 or 15 rehearsals together, it's a completely another case of approximation. And nowadays I'm doing this approximation together with the performer and the commissioner, and asking, what do you think about this, and is this detailed enough or too much detail? Here's some dynamic mapping as well. Okay, there is this other way of analyzing, This is the same piece, but here you can see the first 39 seconds in regards to soundscape is in the blue font, and the sonic effects are in the gray and red fonts. There's something in Finnish, so it might be a bit hard to read, but I'll point out something. The keynote sound is something that is pervasive throughout the soundscaping, like the dominating element. Sound mark is something specific to a soundscape that differentiates it from all the other soundscapes. And then signal is something active. Then with the sonic effects in gray and red, these are the main elements in the first, this drone wave of sound, this coloring element, and this distortion element. Why I've highlighted on red is this is something I want to invite the listener via the performers. So the performers and the pianists will invite the listeners to focus on the drone and to focus on the wave with their material. Let's go forward. There's another, before we can listen to this soundscape part without the piano first, but seeing the notation, but just the soundscape. On the second soundscape, we'll hear this rattling sound. There's a very ubiquitous sort of wall of sound, but there is this rattling sound coming from a specific place, and I want this hyperlocalization to be emphasized by the players, and the players will do this rattling sound from the tuning pegs in the piano. In the next sound, there is this sort of wall of sound that I'm trying to address with the pianist using the whole register. And in the next sound after this, there is a wow effect, this sort of undulating, very low sound going up and down. And these hyper-localized, very small elements. So let's hear for a while just the soundscape without the piano, but you will see the notation at the same time without the players. So let's go to this video. So we have a short amount of time, and I'll show you a short excerpt of our first rehearsal with the Spanish piano duo Alter Faz. Because of COVID, we had a rehearsal in June, but because of COVID, the performance is postponed. And so far, I have only this, it's not prima vista, but it's seconda vista playing. So there will be a lot of balances and rhythms going a little bit here and there. But what you will hear is this installation composition quality. It means that the role of the performers is it's much more passive than in a regular concert piece. They're inviting the listener to listen to the soundscape. So I think you will hear this this aspect at least. So let's listen to the same excerpt, but with the piano in rehearsal for a moment. I would like to, it would be nice to listen to this more, but I'm looking at the time and I don't want to take others' time, so this might be a good moment to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Ville. Thanks a lot. I'm going to pick up on a lot of kind of things you said, and as you know, I will play one of your works, so hopefully everybody can keep in mind what Ville's been talking about. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Lucy, and I'm a clarinetist, and I'm also a doctoral candidate at the Sibelius Academy. And today I'm going to talk to you about my doctoral project, but a bit more specifically about some case studies of things that are kind of in my lap right now that I think demonstrate very well this sort of operational aspect of interface and operational aspect of performer agency and specifically in a new music sort of context. So you have on your screen my very long doctoral project title, which Mieko already introduced, contemporary clarinet repertoire from Finland and the United States, new ways of artistic expression and a study of sociocultural differences. So what is it that I actually do? So the two research aims of my project are to first develop myself artistically by studying and performing new music repertoire. Prior to sort of the end of my master's at Sibelius Academy in 2016, I hadn't played a lot of new music. Like a classically trained clarinetist, like if there are any clarinetists out there, you know, I had my solo and accompanied pieces, things for competitions, but it wasn't really an area I had really explored. So that was a big aim in this doctoral research. And then secondly, to understand how and why American and Finnish contemporary music practices are performed and practiced differently. So again, like I said, this inspiration came from the idea that I realized that there were sort of unique skills that one could learn, if one wants to again use this analogy of a toolbox, that you can only get through contemporary repertoire. And that was very appealing to me. And then also my personal experience of experiencing contemporary music, both as a performer and as an audience member in the United States and Finland. As you might have heard from my accent, I am not Finnish. I am born in the US, but I've been based in Helsinki since 2013. So when I started planning my research project, I thought I would learn through this standard repertoire idea, an idea of something traditional, as Mieko talked about, sort of a very classical sense of sort of music performance. But I realized kind of quickly that that was both impossible and counterproductive, because the idea, this classical idea of sort of standard or canonical repertoire doesn't exist in the same way in contemporary music because there is just so much repertoire. But maybe more importantly, it's very counterintuitive to contemporary music practice because so much of what's inherent to contemporary music practice is a shared sense of ownership in the production process, performer-composer collaboration, as has been mentioned, and performer agency. And so I quickly kind of realized that the idea of what kind of music, what style of music, what composers, what works, was not as important to me in my research as how and why. How the music is performed, why it's performed, why are we picking this piece, how are we playing it, how are we presenting it to the audience, also gives much more agency to performers and less reliance on classical music institutions, which are very much built on a what model. And by classical music institutions, it can be music school, orchestras, opera, whatever. So what does this mean in practice? So I'm going to bring to you 3 case studies, if you want to call them that, from my research. The first is a CD, which I finished recording this spring and will be out this fall. The second is a concert series that will, knock on wood, everybody cross their fingers, is going to start this weekend, actually. And it was an offshoot of an idea I had from my second doctoral concert. And the final example I bring is some data from a programming study that I started at the very beginning of my research in 2017, comparing contemporary music practices of large American and large Finnish orchestras. So first, my CD, which is supposed to be released at the end of this year. And the topic of the CD was always going to be music with electronics. This is my third, it's going to serve as my third doctoral concert. As Mieko mentioned, we have 5. So the third doctoral concert was always going to focus on music with electronics. This will be a commercially produced CD through Sibelius Academy's own record label, SIBA Records, which is a Naxos. They have a Naxos affiliation. So it'll be on Spotify, it'll be on all that. So it was always going to be music with electronics, and commercial viability wasn't necessarily a factor in the sense that, unfortunately or fortunately, nobody seems to really expect classical music CDs or contemporary music CDs to make a big profit nowadays. but I did have to appeal. I did have to appeal to the record label. I did have to make a proposal. So this was a challenge, a consideration in sort of picking my repertoire. And again, I initially thought maybe of starting with some core American music with electronics for clarinet. There are a couple pieces, and there are a couple pieces because both Finnish and American contemporary music have a long history of composers working with electronics. So there is some sort of historic precedent there, but nearly all the composers were male, over the age of 60-ish, and not that there's anything wrong with that. I will play any music if I like it, but I wanted that the composers I chose represented really what I understood contemporary music to be, which is very diverse, lots of different styles, different approaches, different aesthetics, different ages, different backgrounds. So I ultimately ended up choosing 4 American and 4 Finnish female composers, ages 26 to 57. The pieces were composed between 1999 and 2020. And there was 1 commission on the album by the American composer Molly Joyce. There were a lot of challenges, as anyone who's ever recorded could tell you. This is my first experience recording. So I was trying to think of kind of the biggest challenges. The first was adapting to recording as someone accustomed to primarily live performance. Is anyone, I'm sure many of you have recorded before, you know this is nothing new, but it's a challenge. And understanding music, particularly contemporary music, without this visual component, and then understanding how that would translate to an audience when all you have is what's coming out here. That was an artistic challenge, really. The second big challenge was that each work on the album dealt with electronics in a completely different way. Some had live, some had processed, some were very specific and notated, some were not. Some pieces really were never, a couple of them were never published. And so I was kind of figuring all this stuff out myself. This had to be figured out both in the recording process and in the post-production process. So this idea of decision-making on many levels was a huge artistic challenge, and decisions that I previously might have associated as kind of composer decisions. Things as a classically trained clarinetist, I might have expected things that I could learn from an existing recording or from the score. I had to make those decisions myself. And so again, it really bolstered this sort of performer agency mentality in what I was doing. There was no really composer's domain and performer domain. It was all one. So with that, I would like to play for you a bit from the CD. These are the first piece, well, we'll start there. The first piece is by Nina Shaker, who is an American composer of Indian descent, and she's currently a PhD candidate at Princeton University. This is her piece, Honk If You Love Me, for B-flat clarinet and fixed media, composed in 2018, and has never been recorded before. There are recordings that are floating around on the internet, but this is, I would say, first version mix. So it's been edited, it's been initially mixed, but we're still fine tuning it. So let's listen a bit. Oh. Okay, so I will leave that there. And the second piece I'd like to play for you is the only piece on the album that's actually been recorded, which brings its own pressures, as one can probably imagine. It was written for the Finnish bass clarinetist Heikki Niikola, who has commissioned the vast majority of very extensive bass clarinet Finnish repertoire. This piece was composed in '99, bass clarinet and live electronics. And I'm going to start us in a little bit and play for you just a touch. And we'll start it about there. And I will stop it there. You will, if you want to hear more, you just have to wait for the CD to come out in a couple of months. So moving on to the next example, next case study. So elolinen, which means kind of translates to living or organic in Finnish. It is a concert series that will be starting. Like I said, fingers crossed, this weekend in Talviputarha, which is the winter garden here in Helsinki. And it's one of my favorite places in the city. That isn't a restaurant probably, but it's based on, or I was inspired by a concert, the Elolinen concert, which was supposed to be my second doctoral concert in the garden. And the original idea for the concert was to design a concert specifically for that space. So it included solo and very, very small chamber works suited to, there was also 2 pieces with electronics, and the repertoire was selected for acoustic and narrative properties specifically for the garden, which has 3 kind of chambers. There's 3 rooms in the garden, and each room has different acoustics, different layout, different ambient sound, different kinds of plants. And so the concert was designed where I would play different pieces in the different chambers of the garden. Now, unfortunately, because of COVID, the concert had to be moved to the concert hall last fall. It was supposed to be in the spring, pushed to the fall. The garden didn't open because of restrictions. And so the concert was held ultimately in the organ hall here at the Helsinki Music Center. And even though that was disappointing, I still tried to be experimental in how I used the organ hall. The organ hall here, it's kind of like a square, and there's choir balconies up above on the side. There are organ balconies, and then the audience kind of sits in the middle, and it's open seating. You kind of set up the chairs how you want. And so I wanted to have some movement in the space, and I wanted to be able to experience the different challenges of the different acoustic places. So I had different pieces in different parts of the organ hall. And unfortunately, because of COVID, the audience couldn't move around, but at least I could do something. And inspired by the experience and my still secret desire to do concerts in the Botanic Garden, I decided to start a concert series. And so there will be 7 concerts. I asked for applications from people, and people submitted some really great ideas. And ultimately, it was open to any style of music. Any presentation people wanted to do. They could talk, they could not talk, they could move around. But what I was looking for was any performance that made use of the space in a creative way. And so the series will be, there's some very classical music, violin, cello duets, there's contemporary music, there's percussion improvisation, there's electroacoustic DJing, there's mixed chamber music with visual artists. So again, this idea of how and why being much more important to me than what. And the concert will be, I put the links there for you. There's the Instagram handle at Elolinen Hokoi Helsinki. And then there's also a link to the information on the series on my website if anyone's interested in. There's a promo video that kind of shows the garden a bit. And so because the series hasn't started yet, I can't play you anything from the garden, unfortunately, but what I can play for you is Vile's piece, Gardening Etudes number 1, Everyday Etudes number 1, Gardening, that we did in the inaugural Elolinen concert in the organ hall last fall. There's Vile featured on objects. I play bass clarinet, Tuukka Tervo, a wonderful sound engineer, and I'll play you, let's see what we have time for. I'll play you about half of it, a little less than half of it. Enjoy. And I will have to leave you there. This video is on YouTube. You can see the title there. I very much encourage you to come take a look, check it out. It's a fantastic piece. It's really engaging. It was like by far the audience favorite from the concert. And we're going to be hopefully playing it in the garden in about a month. So finally, no, it wants to play again. Finally, the last case study, if you will, that I'm going to bring to you is from some programming studies that I have done that I started, like I said, in 2017. The reason I started it is because I started my research operating under the premise that contemporary music was practiced differently in Finland and the US. And as an orchestral musician, which I still consider myself, orchestra programming has always been very interesting to me. And I wanted to see if the orchestra programming data reflected what I was experiencing as a performer. And thankfully it did. Again, the full reports and things yearly are on my website if it's of interest to you. But what I do is I every year, every season, so now I'm in my 5th season, I track contemporary music programming in symphony orchestra concerts. So I don't consider kind of film concerts, pop concerts, Christmas concerts. I really want to stick to, your traditional canonical kind of symphonic concerts. And I look at the biggest 6 US orchestras. So they're abbreviated there, but it's New York, Chicago, Cleveland, Boston, Philadelphia Orchestra, and LA Phil. And then I kind of used 6 comparable orchestras here in Northern Europe: Finnish Radio Symphony, FRSO, and Helsinki Philharmonic, HKO, which you can see there are the 2 from Finland. I do Swedish Radio, Royal Philharmonic Orchestra in Stockholm, and then I also do Danish Radio in Copenhagen and Oslo Philharmonic in Norway. For purpose of this brief discussion, I'm just going to do these 6. So as you can see, quite simply enough, The chart on the bottom shows the percentage of symphony orchestra concerts that featured at least one work composed after 1980 in the 2018 season. And then the chart above shows the same exact data for this current season, 2020-2021. And even though some of the orchestras have only released, because of COVID, their fall programming, you can see there's quite a big jump. The American orchestras have all drastically increased their contemporary music programming. And the scale, you can even see by the scale, the percentage scale. And so I also did the same, I wanted to chart the same for you, just showing the number of contemporary works. So again, the bottom graph is from 2017, 2018, the top graph is this season. And you see the same, more contemporary music. And so what does this mean sort of to me? In a nutshell, I go obviously a lot more into it when I talk about the data on my site, and there'll be an article one of these days. But basically, the Finnish orchestras are pretty consistent in the amount of contemporary program they do. It's part of their classical music culture, which is what I've experienced here. And it's not limited. These are the two Helsinki orchestras I use, but it is not limited to the capital. I mean, orchestras in regional orchestras, city orchestras, all across the country, a lot of contemporary music. But in the 5 years I've been doing this study, the contemporary music performance practice of these American orchestras, at least, is really changing. The data indicates how much and what styles of composers are being played, which I kind of refer to as a contemporary performance profile, including ratios of commissions and premieres. And I've included it here to kind of demonstrate, this whole time I've been talking about performer agency and contemporary performance being a very much performer-led practice. But this study has also showed me that institutions of classical music, big institutions, and probably the same can be seen in academies, are reacting to the same changes that I'm feeling as a performer. So to wrap up very quickly, my research has really demonstrated to me the central role that the performer has in contemporary music practice, this shared sense of ownership, the challenges of considering how and why, obligations I have of considering how and why, and bringing that music to an audience, and ever evolving expectations I have of myself and what I should be doing as a performer have really shaped my overall approach to all aspects of my music making, from the personal work of my CD, what I want to create and give audiences in the garden, and also observing the changes being felt by larger classical music institutions like US orchestras, I think indicates a very much operational aspect of this interface that Mieko was talking about. So with that, I thank you for listening. Again, for more on my research, anything I talked to today that I went too fast, you can probably check it out there. And with that, I will pass it on to Maria, my colleague.
Thank you so much, Lucy and Ville. It's really fascinating to hear your process with your research. We have been doing these kind of presentations a couple of times, and every time I learn something new. So thank you for this opportunity to come to present my research topic. My name is Maria Bouzari. I'm violinist and specialized in contemporary music. But as Mieko probably mentioned earlier, I also have a very traditional background and education. I am a member of Finnish Radio Symphony Orchestra, and happy to see that we are one of the leading orchestras in contemporary music. Thank you, Lucy, for showing that. And I also play in a contemporary music ensemble called Ensemble. And my research at Docmus department is about contemporary music. So in my 5 concerts, I perform music that was composed after the Second World War, since there was so much happening in music after that. So I want to have kind of full idea of what kind of different types of music was composed and how to perform it. And my research topic is communication and interaction. I have always been interested of how to interact with others in music. And first I could actually share my Keynote there to just start the presentation. So communication and interaction was at first what I was thinking about, and it actually then focused more on leading. I just wonder, can I move this panel somewhere here? And
you can close the video. That might help.
Yes, just a second. I'm sorry for this. I have to
just minimize the video and move the Zoom tabs down, I think. If you can minimize the video on the right-hand side of the screen.
Yes.
And then pull down the operating tab of Zoom.
Yeah, for some reason I have to stop sharing for a moment and remove this. So to be able to control it. I'm sorry for technical problems. There. So my research topic is leading as a mode for communication and interaction in the performance practice of contemporary music. And the starting point for the current article or the research that I'm now writing was my observation of different focus of attention conditions. When I was performing as an ensemble member and usually a leader of an ensemble, I was quite relaxed, not worried of my own performance, because I was so concentrated on, first of all, leading the ensemble, on communicating with other musicians, and that actually produced quite good musical outcomes. Whereas when I was performing alone, as a solo performer, I tended to concentrate too much on my playing techniques, for example, or to be worried about intonation and so on. And this caused different mental state, of course. I was more nervous of my performance, and sometimes I found that my performances were not that good as they could have been. And I found that different focus of attention conditions actually explain quite a lot of these outcomes, both on mental and musical side. And so in ensemble mode, I had external focus of attention. So focus of attention means that what one is concentrating to or thinking of when performing. So externally, it's further away from myself, and in internal focus of attention is very close to myself, to my own gestures also. And that made me to ask whether or not leading and the leader's attitude could be used as a mode of interaction and communication in the performance practice of contemporary solo violin work. And I wanted to include practice for particular reasons, because I have noticed that leading actually has to be learned when you are practicing alone, especially when you are leading contemporary music ensemble. And as a theoretical frame, I use metaphors and do metaphorical mappings, research on focus of attention, and research on gestures. Gestures have been clarified in many ways. For example, they can be sound producing, communicative, ancillary, sound facilitating, and sound accompanying gestures. And that helps me to understand what kind of gestures I'm using. Well, then shortly, what is leading? How do I conceptualize it? Leading is conducting with an instrument while playing. So, for example, giving an upbeat, up, downbeat, down, showing beating patterns like triangle, beat, beat. And leading gestures are used to guide, cue, and help to synchronize ensemble playing. And especially in contemporary music, it's really a necessary skill even to be able to practice, to play through the work together. However, leading is multi-directional, so many directions, not only one group or not only one person. It's multimodal, using different senses, cross-modal, using different senses at the same time, and very interactive. And so a lot of intentional and non-intentional body gestures and even body positions, facial expressions, instrument movements, typically breathing, listening to each other, and gaze, like looking directly or peripherally, sensing others around, other different ways of leading and actually getting information of others. And there are different ensemble roles, of course, inside ensembles. So leader, but also co-leader, followers. And typically in my ensemble, we use shared leading, which means that I may be the main leader of the group, but in particular places, someone else is taking the leading responsibility or co-leading with me by giving important upbeats together or something like that. And I divide leading in ensemble in two different techniques. So temporal leading technique and expressive leading technique. This was just in order to kind of find out what kind of body use I have. So temporal leading techniques include, for example, showing the beginnings, endings, nodding pulse, showing beat patterns and tempi and time change, showing different agogics in music. And leading gestures, how I mainly use them is showing the pulse and beat patterns and beat directions. So optimally, leading is always kind of based on the ensemble's needs, not just that I practice something and then I do it. And basically, temporal leading technique has to be learned as one playing technique among others and embedded in the body language in order to really be able to do it in ensemble. So when I practice alone, I practice leading as one mode of performing. Showing character, affects, dynamics, articulation, and direction of phrases. It's kind of giving an embodied narrative of music. And quite often, multifunctional body gestures and postures, directions are also quite unconsciously done. So you're not always aware of that you are, for example, showing temporal changes with your body movements. It's quite natural. And expressive leading can be used, for example, to show an upbeat in certain character of music. Either it's very rhythmic and sharp, or then it might be like breathing deeply. Well, then what could be leading in a solo performance? This is very strongly a metaphorical concept, and which I started to use when learning some of the case studies that I will show next. And metaphorical mapping between leading in an ensemble and leading in a solo performance means that I try to map the areas that I have the way of leading in ensemble, and then see how does it fit to this new source domain of leading in a solo performance. I find that leading in a solo performance has two directions. So leading myself, which was actually the starting point for the whole action, and then leading the audience, which is even more metaphorical than leading solo. And then let's go to the case studies just to show in practice what does it mean. So here I have Toccata by Helmut Laherman. It is solo violin work that is based on very soft sounds, so very difficult to, all projecting the sounds is one challenge of this work, and also using only extended playing techniques. So this is an example of the notation. The upper stave describes the bow actions. So the strings are damped with the bow screw, which produces the actual pitches. And the lower stave is for left hand, which is damping or plucking the strings. And this was the most difficult work I had ever practiced. It was very difficult to approach it. And when I finally understand how I should try to play, I simply couldn't, because I didn't know what to do with my gestures. And thus, to create more outsider perspective, I started to use leading as a word to have myself a sense of more third-person perspective to my own playing. And this is how it started. Here is my performance from my first doctoral concert that I show a bit to give you an idea of how does this work sound. And so on. That was about almost a half of the work. You could notice that my gestures are very controlled and quite narrow, because the technique itself needs quite a lot of control. I used leading especially in the practice content, and it really helped me to create and stabilize the pulse and the temporal structure when performing. And traces of that action is left in the performance. So I don't know if you could observe it, but for me, there was all the time a very controlled sense of pulse and timing musical gestures in a very percussive way, actually, since the technique is very percussive. And the sound production is, of course, another important issue here. And the leading underlined the importance of a gesture in sound production, since it expands of sound and helped to group sounds in larger gestural patterns and sequences. So I could approach it with a more bigger groups of sounds. And clarifying the function of different gestures even helped me to articulate Toccatina by strengthening the useful performing gestures and diminishing the amount of hazardous or disturbing gestures. And grouping the performance gestures in bigger patterns and sequences helped me to learn Toccatina by heart, which actually was quite important for the performance. For the dynamics, the listener's perception of loudness is affected by the size of the performance gestures that reflect the physical energy. And since their Toccatina includes subtle playing techniques and very controlled playing techniques, the direction and dynamic scale of phrases and sound production cannot be created by typical means such as speed and pressure, volume, that is normally generated by bow movements or the body movements. Therefore, an illusion of different dynamic and articulation levels in music had to be emphasized gesturally. And technically, using both sound facilitating and sound accompanying gestures as a part of my performance helped me to project the sound with my sound producing gestures. So I kind of tried to understand different gestures and how to use them. I also use gestures in doing or emphasizing dynamics. So for example, ascending crescendo line by increasing the amplitude of the right hand and arm gesture. And so that the loudest dynamic would be indicated with the largest gesture. However, the gestures are quite narrow. And same goes for the agogics. So right hand and arm gestures help to maintain the overall pulse when to do accelerandos and ritardandis. And actually, direction of phrasing was the same. So they use very gently the body gestures, different ancillary gestures to show where I intend to go. Was a sort of gestural breathing with the audience. Now, this is really a metaphorical concept, but it helped me to involve the audience as my ensemble, with whom I perform. And in a way, this made the performing much easier for myself. Then I actually commissioned a new piece from Jouni Hirvelä, who is my colleague in Docmus and also a Finnish composer, Chessi for violin and electronics and video, to research more of this leading in solo performance. And here I have electronics and video added to the performance. So here are different lines for video, audio, and violin performance. And now there is some material from the beginning of the work. There you could see that I'm playing actually with a pencil. So even smaller object to tap the strings and different parts of the violin. And it doesn't produce very much sound. So I try to emphasize beginnings, upbeats, phrasing, or phrase endings with gestural elements to somehow show the sequences or show the phrases. That also led me to ask myself, what kind of quality or motivation do I have for gestures? So are they sharp? Are they gentle, invisible, or emphasized? And here gestures really create an image of sound. Since the violin is not amplified, there is electronic sound and there is acoustic violin sound. And furthermore, there are those video clips. And gestures are used to help audience to perceive the soft dynamics. The other thing in Gesti is foot pedal press, that is launching different acoustic and video files, but it also launched leader, co-leader, follower roles, of course in me, because files are electronic. And there was also a question of what kind of foot pedal press should I use, visible or invisible? And foot pedal became very important factor in training and timing with sonic and visual elements. There might, in some performances, there was a little delay between the pedal press and the actual outcome. And I observed that if I was only following, for example, the electric file, all my playing reactions were delayed, so I was late. And if I used supportive leading or co-leading and tried to play together, even without knowing when the actual sound would come, I ended up to more synchronized performance. And here is a short example of that kind of in training. So video, I launch the files in number 20 and then start quintuplet playing from electronics and video, which I have to entrain and join with my left finger hand finger tapping quintuplet off beats, and then start to tap synchronized tapping with my pencil. And this is how it sounds. Start. Then in the third movement of Gesti, I took the bow in the end of the first movement. This kind of synchronization became even more critical. For example, I underlined with red pencil big numbers 38 and 40, where my pedal use has to combine two sections. So myself scratching 32 notes, to video and electronics doing the same, and then back to my own actions. It also, this page features also the most peaceful moment of the whole piece, around 39, which is full of freedom, because one does not have to synchronize so much with the tape. And there I noticed that actually I use different kind of body balancing, third direction more to audience, just to color these different tone colors like sul ponticello or sul tasto. And here is an example of that. This is actually a surprise for me, how much I had to use this kind of co-leading action, when playing with electronics, I realized that if I did not give myself an upbeat, for example, to press the pedal or to play some rhythms, I was totally late with my own playing, but also with the tape. So that was the most surprising finding in this study. If I only listened and reacted to the audio and video, I did not sense the rhythm in my body. So I need leading to sense the rhythm, and that seems to be really important, at least for me, to be able to predict what is coming. Then about theatrical gestures. In jazz, there are also places where there practically is no sound, and the image of sound is created only by theatrical gestures, and only the gestures make it possible to have some kind of idea of sound. This is from the last movement, fourth movement, which starts with different bow strokes. Like the feather is the description, and they have to be carefully planned to somehow make a phrase and give an impression of different actions. This is the final. To sum up, the metaphor of leading changed my focus of attention from internal towards external. And that helped to project especially soft sounds and these extended techniques, and even to learn the extended techniques. When I started to conceptualize audience and myself as an ensemble, it gave me a feeling of communication. Of course, I cannot say how the audience finds it. I cannot say that now audience finds itself to be in interaction with me, but at least it helped me to have a sense of interaction, and which made actually my feeling on stage much nicer, and also my feeling when practicing much nicer. Of course, musical intentions and interpretation guide gestures. So what we think we do, we have to plan our interpretation or listen to the music and try to find our way. Musical intentions then also explain us what are the gesture's motivation and the quality that is needed. But leading can be used to intensify and emphasize this interpretation we want to do. And I use leading also to teach myself and there is, of course, a question, what is the limitation of gestures? So, for example, I feel that in Toccattina by Laheman, I was still quite in a packed mode, maybe even performing more of this work. It becomes more free, it's easier, my gestures are more relaxed. And in Hirvelä, I found that I have to use quite a lot of gestures. So much gestures that even the sound actually is not so perfect anymore, just to have an image of sound and to make the performance communicative. I observed that leading is an effective tool and actually a bodily metronome in practice to create temporal structure, define musical and performing gestures and how to use them, to learn dynamics and phrasing, and really to intensify them. So I would say that since in practice we can always stop and take it again. So then it really was a very good tool for me. And in performance, which is supposed to start at one point and end at the final point and not to be cut, that's a different mode of playing. So of course, I guess everybody who is traditionally trained is trying to play with pure sound and beautifully and correctly and whatever. And it might be that, for example, in these examples that I show from concerts, my physical actions in leading look different than they would be when I'm testing them in practice. But in performance, leading helped me to focus attention externally, which was extremely important in these works that use extended playing techniques and are very soft in sound. And that stabilized my performance and reduced the nervousness. So in a way, I got the target that I was looking for having better musical outcomes and less sense of nervousness when performing alone. This is, of course, a very personal approach, the performance. Maybe someone thinks that this is not needed or not useful, but at least it helped me to approach solo performance in a different way and at least to show some empathy for myself in performance. So I think I used my minutes quite tightly. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, and I'm sure that so are Ville and Lucy. So sharing.
Thank you all so much for your wonderful presentations. And I really love how everything connects to this theme of the interface and also the idea of empathy and, of course, connecting with listeners and thinking about the performance experience and how it is received and how we can project it and the various ways, various strategies, various methods that we come up with to communicate. So yes, thank you very much. Dr. Kanno, did you want to add any remarks?
Not really, but I see there are two questions. Yes. The first one is about the composer-performer collaboration. That
Sarah Witt, one of our colleagues in PGYM.
Yes, it's about the first question is are they sharing, composers and performers sharing some common aspects or completely different aspects for creating music performance? Or I suppose it's we are talking about approaches or perspectives here. Do you think that when we collaborate with, composers and performers collaborate, do you think that the standpoints are still very distinct?
I might answer first, because this question immediately reminded me of rehearsal I had with Ville last year while in praise, where Ville just asked me to can you lead this section from here to there. And using that, I was rather surprised, because of course composers know that their works have to be led, but that was a very fascinating example of that, that we in a way saw the strategy, so to say, in the same way, that to physically lead the action to emphasize the structural detail in music. I don't know if Ville remembers this case.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about this leading, and I started to think about this leading a lot with your research ongoing. It's it's a question of sort of somehow it's like a question of position. When do you kind of hope for the main focus to be for the audience, let's say, or for the performer, or sort of like having a discussion all the time, or could it be somehow mediated in the performance or making the work or a specific production? But in general, yeah.
For example, I see references in your work, Vincent, to Hirvelä's work, which was now here as a case study, in a way that, for example, in your work, Vincent, you had a lot of cooperation between violinists, what kind of sounds the violinist produces, and with a video. So if there was something very soft, like touching something soft, so that then I would touch my violin scratches softly and not to use all power, full power, and so. And in this way, leading actually is written in music or in score, which I find very fascinating. Of course, for example, Hirvelä knew that I'm doing this research. He's also a doctoral student, and in a way he composed these theatrical gestures in the score, but probably he had done it even without me, or even without knowing this. But I find it, after conceptualizing leading as a mode of performing, I find it very fascinating how I started to read the scores. So the pure notes, the notation, and because the notation is, however, the domain where a composer can transform his or send his ideas to performers.
Yeah,
and I think the contemporary composers are. Yes, please.
Yeah, I would also argument that it's important to have like a possibility for misinterpretation as well, to maybe somehow perform something against the score, and then also the audience sort of point of view, how to present, let's say, it's like a particular performance or piece a little bit against the original idea, to have a sort of tension or counterpoint or discussion. This is also, I think it's an interesting way to think. What do you think about this? Are we even answering the question?
I could also, I'm not muted. I could also add to the discussion that I think that as someone who works with different contemporary music cultures, I've observed that there is no common or same expectation on the part of composer and performer. The dynamics can be very, very different. So there are some instances of of collaboration that is very much inherent in the compositional process, which I think is what Murray and Ville were talking about. And I've also had this experience working with Ville myself too, where it's I don't know that there is, I guess the line between composer and performer gets a little less separated, I would say, because it's a very collaborative process. But there's also still instances of composers, contemporary composers at work today in many different places who view their job as putting all musical ideas into the score, dictating clearly exactly what he or she or they want, and then it is the performer's job to translate, interpret, whatever terminology you use to work with notation. And there's a very different sort of expectation and guidelines to the role of the performer and the role of the composer. And I would probably just add that both are right, and probably anything in between are right. There's no, in my opinion, at least, there's no right or wrong way. It's all about understanding the role, and especially as a performer, understanding what's expected of you when you're working with a score. This was a big thing for me in my project of quite often I want to look at the score coming in. I would always say, well, everything should be there, but no, that's not necessarily the case, is it? Sometimes you are expected as performer to contribute, whether you can work with the composer or not, you still have something to contribute. And it's understanding sort of through notation, through understanding what is coming from the page or whatever the notation might be, what is expected of you. And so in terms of the second question of a border between performer and composer, sometimes there is no border and sometimes there's a very firm border, and anywhere in between, I think.
Thank you for those perspectives. Oh, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah. May I just kind of like try to answer your questions to Professor Kanno at the beginning about her musical approaches to all the ideas of empathy. I mean, just kind of telling a short story because Professor Kanno, if I may, correct me if I'm wrong, from what I know from my former teachers and an examiner during my PhD, Mieko Edwards, I should say, I know that Professor Kanno is always collaborating with him, and she has a repertoire playing on the electro violins, Baroque violins, exploring microtonalities and complex notation, and all these things. So those are, would you call it, those things are your interface in some way? Is that your area that you're expanding like beyond just a normal practice as a violinist? Questions and answers in some way. I'm very impressed. when I read your bio, I was like, I never know that you also play Baroque violin. Something.
Well, in my case, you know, instruments are also a technology, and if you know, I learned to make music by playing the violin, the normal violin, but then, you know, developing the instrument or trying out different instruments, 7-stringed violin or something, those things always interest me, just because it's part of the technology I can play with in that sense. And then yes, so yes, musical instrument is one interface with which we develop our music communication and vocabulary. So yes, with working with people like Michael Edwards, it's the part of the pleasure is to get to see music through his spectacles, so to speak, because he is a music programmer. That's what he does, as well as being a composer. He's somebody who can just write programs for a living if he wanted. And because the people who've been in computing in the last 20, 30 years or even longer do have a developed sense of what an interface can be, because so much of computing science has been about that. And I don't mean just technically developing an interface on the, you know, as a user interface, but the whole structure of how to formulate knowledge into such a way that people can understand, as well as how to communicate that to users. Because it is a discipline where, unless people understand how to use it, there is not much value nowadays. So and then that aspect is ingrained in his aesthetics too. That he does this programming not because it is theoretically interesting, but because it produces music that he hasn't ever thought of. It expands our imagination, and that's something I really enjoy learning from people like him. And well, in fact, so that's one kind of musical interface. But as I said earlier, getting to know my collaborators, these 3 collaborators who happen to be doing the doctoral studies, that's been another kind of that has given me a new, what kind of interface they are developing. I mean, some of them are more familiar to me than others, but of course, as I said, details matter. How each person implements is very different, and that difference is what makes it interesting. I mean, the concept of interface itself isn't anything new, but how each one implements it through the issues they are faced with, challenges. How do I communicate? How do I make sense of this or that? And then, people who are doing master's or doctoral programs have plenty of experience in playing an instrument or composing music. Expertise is already there, but how this expertise is implemented is what makes it interesting and what makes worthwhile talking about an interface, I would say. Did I answer your question?
You did, and it actually led to my next questions, tying up to, we had another keynote this morning from Tokyo. He's a composer, improvises, and he mentioned like he's a kind of improviser who works with 1,000 people through internet or going to a fish market and make music together with people. So he's exploring the ideas of community, connecting music to people as well. But there was one thing that he mentioned, that he said there was one site that he worked just right after the tsunami, and at those times when affected by all these natural disaster, people are left with desperation, and then at the end, instead of, they have no one to blame, so what happens is they start fighting each other at the end after of those disasters. So I have a feeling that now in the musical world we are desperate. We have a lot of musicians who's really kind of like fought for very few resources that we want to hang on to. What do you think, like, and I'm really intrigued that you're bringing 2 worlds completely, as you say, interface in a very programming, computer-based, and empathy with a full of human quality. I mean, how do you see that ideas of interface, empathy might be able to help us prevent the, how would you call it, the killing within the musical world after the post-COVID era? Sorry, it's a big question, but can you please maybe share a little bit? This can be a starting of a new symposium next year for this kind of topic. But can you maybe share some ideas from the panelists or from you as well, Professor Kanno?
Can I just make one reference? I mean, that was also clear in Wieler's music. We are going through this ecological crisis, global warming. And then I was talking to people in the Forest Institute in Finland the other day, and they say that the challenge they have is that people know there is this crisis, but they don't really, I mean, they understand, they can see the data and they understand intellectually, but they don't quite understand it as a personal experience. You know, it's something to watch on television, and then there are images that come with it. And then, of course, the question that came to me was that, can music and sound people do something about it? You know, can we somehow find a way to persuade audience, the public, to realize what this crisis is about as a lived experience, not just as something we read on our iPad. I didn't know how to answer, but I mean, I just want to share that with you.
It's just.
I think there is actually, yes, I actually, now to combine Mieko's question here, can we do something, and about this empathy level or interfaces. I think art in general, or music, has a huge possibility to touch. At the moment, at least in Finland, we are living in the middle of restrictions of concert halls, and there is audience that really would love to come to concert halls to listen. And I think this is the worldwide scene at the moment, that we have audience. As Mieko earlier said, that there is audience who is actually all the time listening online, but there's also a huge need to be together as living human beings. And that is a huge possibility for musicians to really find out ways how to live with the audience. I don't even want to use the word performance, since I feel nowadays more and more that we are together in the kind of ritual of being inside the performance. And what comes to, for example, ecological topic, one of the most striking moments for me was a work by Finnish composer Minna Leinonen, and her work for chamber ensemble, where there is a metronome ticking all the time. In the performance, it was an old-fashioned metronome. The metronome was supposed to, after the old-fashioned metronome's energy went off earlier, and it stopped before the music stopped. And that was a striking moment of that we have no time left. And in this way, music or arts actually can really touch our, not our cognitive level only, but also the emotional level, empathy level. And after this performance, for example, my mother, who is not a musician, who is a curious listener, she said that music has the power to make us understand. We can read, we can have the cognitive side of everything, whatever it is, not necessarily ecological level, but whatever topic. But music has the power to really penetrate our soul and well, let's say all the empathy levels to understand what happens. And I think this is the power of music, and the performers, composers, also audience who is taking part in the whole performance. We have huge possibility to expand our understanding in many things.
Yes, thank you so much. I think it's so good to constantly remind ourselves that this is what we're trying to do, is create this sense of empathy and understanding, and that is what it's all about. And that's the most powerful thing we can do with music. And also, I really like what Dr. Kanno mentioned in her keynote, that sometimes we get so focused on the visual aspect of our world, and actually in our modern times, it's all about the visual aspect. But actually, if we open up and listen more, and if we conduct our lives being more perceptive and aware of sounds, it can perhaps bring us to a better place as a whole. So thank you so much to all the panelists and to Dr. Kanno for your keynote speech. And this was just a really insightful and thought-provoking session. And we just really appreciate having all of you here. And Maria, you mentioned the metronome stopping and ending the time. So I think our time here is coming to an end as well. But we really hope that you can come visit us in Thailand, hopefully in the future when it's safer. And it was so wonderful to meet you all and to get a chance to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
And thank you,
lovely
Ajahn
to
Hen.
meet you all
Thank you,
too.
Ajahn Hen, as well for helping to moderate this session so wonderfully. So I'm just introducing you to the next session, which will come at 7 p.m. Here, now following all discussion that we had at the end is the idea of hear and found. These are the young entrepreneur in Thailand who's kind of like brought us to the world in the northern part of Thailand to be hearing stories about forests and rivers and how people can live with the stories of things, how things are disappearing. So maybe if you are hearing, you're in the mode of listening of environment, of sounds of natures, and hear how people are living together in harmony with it or not in harmony with it. So please come join us today at 7 p.m. And so thank you so much and wonderful. Thank you you all. Bye-bye and see you next time in Bangkok, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.